Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Susan here with the home edition of Your Voice with Dr. Susan. In response to the emergency with this pandemic related to COVID-19, I've been doing online workshops and talks and interviews with different experts to help people cope with all the various challenges that this pandemic has presented for all of us. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm so grateful and happy to be here with all of you. It's another week. We survived another week. Yay. Okay. And we have this very special guest that I'm so excited to have, Dr. Alison Escalante. And before I tell you a little bit more about Dr. Escalante, I just want us to just breathe together so that we can settle in and all be here together and as we share this space for the next 15 minutes or so. So let's all do, and for those of you that have been on with me before, you know I like to start with just a couple of minutes of breathing and centering. So why don't we do that? And if you want, you can close your eyes or not. If you want to focus on your breathing, you can. If that is not something that you like to do, you could pick a word, health, love, whatever word you want, you could focus on that. So for those that want to breathe, take a nice deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. In through your nose and out through your mouth. And in through your nose. Out through your mouth. And as you breathe, you may start to feel your shoulders relax. And we're letting all the stress of the day and life just leave us just for a moment so that we can be here, be now, and really listen to each other and really take the time out to focus on yourself and to be together in this space. And again, I thank all of you for being here, and I feel really grateful. Okay, and if you had your eyes closed, you can open your eyes. And I also want to share a quote, if I can find it again, that I actually just read today. And I just want to put this out there, and then we'll start our conversation. This was actually a quote from a survivor of the Cambodian genocide of the 1970s. And this really struck me today when I read it. And the quote is, "I can still have this life and this love and still have pain and grief that is unresolved. I can live with love and still be afraid." And I think that that's what we're all struggling with in terms of for ourselves, for our kids, for our loved ones, for our family, friends. And so I'm so happy that Dr. Alison Escalante is with us tonight, and I'm going to introduce her now. I've had the pleasure of knowing her, I think it's actually over 2 years now that from when I met Dr. Escalante. And I'm really proud to say that not only is she now a colleague, but she's also a friend. And in addition to being a board certified pediatrician and having a practice, she's also a contributing writer for Psychology Today, as well as Forbes. She's an adjunct professor, and she also gave a great TED Talk, which you can check out, a TEDx on the culture of perfectionism in parenting. And she calls it the should storm. And I actually use some of her terminology in my practice when I'm working with people. And I quote you, Dr. Escalante, saying, as my friend Alison says, don't should all over yourself. So welcome.
Well, thanks, Dr. Susan. Are we going by first name today?
Whatever you're comfortable with.
Let's do it. It makes it more social, don't you think?
Whichever you prefer.
Yeah. Well, you look beautiful. How are you holding up in New York?
Oh, it's a crazy place here, but I have to say that the sounds of the ambulances have started to decrease, so that's a great sign. Allison's outside of Chicago. So how are you doing there?
Yeah, that's right. In Illinois, as things are starting to slow down in other states, we've now reached, I think, number 4 in the US for cases. So we're still approaching our peak here for COVID cases and for deaths. And, you know, I'm in the suburbs though, so unlike you where you're kind of stuck in your apartment, I get to go outside and listen to the birds chirping and get my kids to ride bikes, which is nice.
Right, and that's different. So it really does impact in terms of how people experience it. Yeah. So, I have lots of questions for you, and I know that some people really want to hear you talk about what it's like for families, particularly parents. Parents are struggling, finding it very challenging on many different levels. So I thought we would start with what do you actually experience as some of the challenges? You also have a Facebook group where you work with parents on your Facebook group, as well as seeing families. And I'm just wondering, we'll start with what's your experience in terms of that you're seeing as some of the challenges that parents are facing right now.
Well, I think it varies so much dependent on whether the parents are both working or whether there's someone who can attend directly to the kids. And I feel like a lot of couples I know have transitioned to both working from home. And so they're on conference calls and Zoom meetings all day long while their children are trying to do homeschool e-learning and needing some adult participation. And that's a big stressor. It's varied because some families, I know families where they're both essential personnel or they're both nurses, and some of them qualify for the assistance childcare, but some of them are just splitting shifts and trying to make up their sleep after working in the ICU while dealing with kids under the age of 3, which is incredibly challenging. And I frankly don't know how they're getting enough rest.
Yeah. Now, you also have 2 young children. So how are you dealing with it? How's your household going?
You know, it was really hairy the first couple weeks or so. I think it was an adaptation for the kids to go from seeing their friends all the time and having that social setting in which to learn to adjusting to e-learning. And at first, I was barely home as COVID rolled in. I was in the office trying to figure out what was happening. Pretty stressed out myself because we were having patients that were suspicious for COVID coming into the office, and we really weren't equipped. Due to the anticipated PPE shortages, the PPE was sent to other locations in our organization, which made sense. So it was a stressful time, and I think the kids always observe. Kids are stress detectors, right? So they just absorb whatever stress their parents had. So my husband doesn't realize it, and I think most people don't realize that when they're doing conference calls, they're shouting the whole time. In fact, he teases me that now that I've started doing telemedicine, I'm shouting when I do telemed. And so you have these kids trying to do school for the first time ever just alone, while their dad is in another room with the door closed shouting for 9 hours and mom is gone. So that was pretty stressful. But they adapted remarkably well. And now, in some ways, I feel like they're actually maybe happier during quarantine. It's really fun to watch them engaging in hours of uninterrupted imaginative play in a way that they've really never been able to before.
And I think because that generation, the children, your children's age, and your kids are, just tell everyone how old they are. I'm forgetting, because one just had a birthday the other day.
That's right. Yesterday, my youngest turned 9, and my oldest is about to be 11 in a few weeks.
And so they're actually used to being on technology. And one of the things that I've seen in the groups that I've worked with adolescents and kids is that, it's similar to what you're saying, they're really adapting a lot better in some ways than the parents are. And I think part of it might be because they've grown up with technology. Technology is a part of them. They're used to socializing through technology, whereas the adults in the older generations really aren't. You know, we're used to being with people. And so for us, it's a huge loss. But I think for them, given that that's their norm anyway, you know, prior to this, a lot of kids just related to each other through electronics, and you had the parents saying, go out, go out. So as what you were saying, like they're happier in this quarantine, I think it makes a lot of sense given the lifestyle that they were having prior to this. So the parents aren't saying anymore, get outside and play. And so I think there's that level of relief because their life was a little bit different, you know?
Well, I hear that loud and clear, but I think that you may be relating to more of an adolescent population because, like most parents I know, we work really hard to limit our kids' screen time. So actually, these were their first ever virtual play dates. We relaxed some of our rules to allow them to play Minecraft while chatting with their friends. But you're right. I mean, they have Chromebooks in school starting in second grade. So they're much more comfortable with the virtual. It is interesting though, because we kick them outside to ride their bikes every day. And we just hope that if they run into a friend around the neighborhood, they're going to social distance while they're riding.
So I know that one of the challenges that parents have had is about this screen time. And you know, how much do they allow their children to be on the screens? What should they be allowing? Are you familiar with any of the recent research that's come out about that?
Oh my gosh, I think I've barraged everyone with write-ups on Psychology Today lately. Screen time is such an issue because there are positives and negatives. For instance, studies keep showing that adolescents are not as injured by screen time as we feared, except if it's social media, where even 30 minutes a day of social media can have a negative impact on their mental health. So it depends on how they're using it. But what I'm really worried about is most parents are surviving quarantine. If they're not able to be the parent who's with the kids all the time, which most parents are not, they're surviving by allowing a lot more screen time than usual. And I feel very compassionate about that. In fact, I've told a lot of my families to give themselves a break on that. But recent research has shown that if kids get introduced to screen time in the preschool years, it impacts their ability to self-regulate. Kids who start seeing screens under the age of 18 months are more likely to have autistic features develop. So there's some real concerns here. And I think that as shelter at home drags on, it becomes, a couple weeks is one thing, but it becomes more concerning.
Yeah. I've also seen some research come out, and again, some of this really has to be done again, and we know the reality of research, sometimes it's not really reliable, but there was some things about the differences in terms of programming. So they found that in one study, children who were watching programs like a Mr. Rogers or a live video stream, let's say of an aquarium or things that were happening live that are actually slower, that, I'm just going to change for video. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, let me go back. So the research was showing that where there was children and adolescents who were watching programs where it was live stream and a slower, like a Mr. Rogers, versus a more commercial, quicker, speeded show, that actually had made a difference in terms of the impact it was having on the processing and the hyperactivity that may be in effect for watching too much. Have you heard any of that?
Well, I think that we've found that TV or ebooks or things like that there is definitely a difference between well-constructed educational content and some of the stuff that's more addictive, that really pulls us in. But I also, there's also some research that when you sit down and watch TV with a child, if you're interacting, in other words, if you're doing what we were always told never to do, which is to talk over the dialogue and ruin the movie, and you guys talk about it and interact about it, it's a very different experience than just sitting and vegging out in front of the TV. So I think that's promising.
And I know that one of your the things that you're expert on, or you like to talk about, and it's been really helpful for people, is about being careful about what parents are doing to themselves. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because a lot, what I'm hearing from some parents is they're feeling really guilty about some of the things they're having to do, and the challenges of how much do they struggle to make their kids do their homework, not even just the homework, but the schoolwork, because they're trying to do work, and the children don't feel like doing work, and what kind of battle to get into. And some people have had to relax their standard, and there's been a lot of controversy. But I think what's really important, I know you can talk to this, is what the parent is doing to themselves. Afterwards.
I think to be a good parent right now, you definitely have to drop your standards. And I feel that I got distracted. There's a little Zoom thing going on here.
I had before when I was playing. Nobody can say I was playing, but there was a technical difficulty that I was.
Right.
It can be a little bit disturbing, yeah.
Well,
before you get back, I just want to also let everybody know that's on the call that we will have a Q&A, some time for Q&A, but also if something comes up and you don't want to forget it, please feel free to put it in the chat. And if you're looking, I think if we're on Facebook Live, which I think there was some technical difficulties, but if we are, I think there's also a way to ask some questions, and Debbie can monitor that as well. So please, even though you and I are having this conversation, I do want to I get some questions, from people. So please feel free to put it in the chat, and we will address those later. And again, there's going to be time for Q&A.
Few findings in neuroscience or behavioral science have been more interesting over the last couple of decades than how we co-regulate with each other. And I think we know that. Everybody knows that stress is contagious, that when you're around that chronically, wound up person, you feel a little wound up. But my unique take on parenting is that it starts with the parents. And I think that most parenting advice, parenting books, even some really excellent ones, focus on how you manage the child. But the reality is that parents are, in our current culture, torturing themselves with the list of all the things that they're supposed to be doing. We live in a culture that believes we need to, and this is everywhere. This is in our workplaces. This is in our leadership development. This is in our workouts. We need to optimize and maximize every element of our life, right? Nobody goes jogging anymore. They do an ultra marathon. Nobody just does crunches. They go do CrossFit. And the same thing has come into our parenting. So that parents are so concerned about giving their kids an optimal childhood experience that they're tormenting themselves with guilt.
Yeah. So what do you talk about? I mean, I know what you talk about. Can you tell everybody how you deal with that and what your recommendations are for folks?
Well, I mean, I think the first part is to understand that it's not people's own idea to do this. I think most people come to this with the idea that that's what you need to do to be a good parent. There's this idea that there's been all these advances in child development science, and if you don't implement them, your kid's going to miss out and be damaged for life. Some parents believe that if they yell at their kids one time, the child will be traumatized for life. And so recognizing the falsehood of generalizations like that is really important. The other thing is understanding that in most cases, kids are pretty self-optimizing. They don't need us to tinker with every little thing about them. They typically are pretty good at pursuing what they need for development. And what is that? They need to mess around with stuff and figure it out. They need social interaction and friends, which obviously is a little challenge right now during social distancing. And they need parents that show them support and love. And when you have those basic things, kids tend to do really very well.
And it's also interesting because parts of our culture and part of the generation of parents, in my generation of parenting and your generation, we've been very protective of our children, more so, I think, at some points in history. And, you know, the generation of parents have been accused of being helicopter parents and really trying to protect our children from experiencing any kind of pain. And, you know, and I think what's been interesting, and I had some conversations recently about this, is that, you know, first of all, that is, you can't do that, right? And it's not only can't you do that, but it's not helpful for parents to do that because kids need to be able to develop coping mechanisms. And of course, nobody wants our children to suffer, but pain is part of life. You know, like suffering, we can teach them not to do, but we're going to all experience pain. And I think one of the things that's been really interesting that's happening now is that, you know, how are parents dealing with that? And one of the things that I'm sure you experience this too is that with the people that you work with, is when people are struggling, and I've talked in my practice with people who are struggling, the parents are struggling and worrying about the kids and having reactions. And I say, you know, stop and think about yourself in that moment and what's happening with you. Because, you know, the old saying is, unless you put the oxygen mask on yourself, you can't help your kids or anybody else. And I find that some of the challenges is to help people to actually do that. Give them permission and to really encourage them to take a look and say, wait a second, what is it that I need? Something's happening here. And before I can just help my child, I need to really help myself and figure out, what am I reacting to? And what do I need? So that I'm not reacting to my kid, I'm responding, and I can really be there for them. Do you want to address that at all? Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there were so many things that you said right there, Susan, but one of them, I just had to say, you know, the quickest way to go from the experience of pain to deeper suffering is to try to avoid the pain. And so when parents constantly try to protect their kids from the experience of pain or instantly soothe it, it does actually create more suffering. But the important thing to understand is parents get so much criticism over this as if it was their idea to become helicopter parents. But that's ridiculous because we know that when an entire culture does things at around the same time, that these are external causes. And what we're seeing is a real reaction to the way so many of us were raised. So it started with the Gen Xers, with me, with the suck it up buttercup, you know, no pain, no gain, tough it out, life is hard, oh well. And I used to aspire to be a version of Arnold Schwarzenegger, that I would somehow be impervious to physical pain. And yet when you get to your kids, you realize, you know, I'm not saying that was all wrong. It wasn't all wrong, but there were times when you really needed somebody to say, you know what, that was really hard and I'm here for you. And why don't you snuggle up? And so what we've done then is we said, okay, let's snuggle up all the time, right? And let me take that for you. And that's where the mistake comes in. And then it's got a slightly different version with the millennials because they were raised with a little bit more of that avoidance of pain from their parents. But in the end, the truth has always been somewhere in between.
Right.
Right? I'm here with you, buddy. That really hurt. Let me give you a hug. I know you can handle this. I know you're going to be okay. So that message, I'm here with you, I support you, and you're strong. And those don't have to be competing messages. But in order to do that, parents have to be able to tolerate their children's pain and tolerate their own anxiety about that pain. And that is the real challenge, you know?
Yeah, and that actually goes back to the quote, right, that I started with, because it's being able to hold both, right? To be able to hold that this is really scary times right now, and we're going to be okay. And I'm here with you. And, I know for myself, the hardest thing to do was to be able to sit with my daughter when she experienced pain and to not just say, no, 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 don't feel that way. Because we've been taught, right? Oh, don't feel that way. Even friends don't feel that way. The first thing, and it comes from a really good place. We don't want the people that we love. We don't want anybody to be suffering or to be in pain. But like I said earlier, pain happens. Pain's a part of life. Suffering doesn't have to be. The pain is. And I just want to underscore that because I think it's so important for parents to hear that it's okay for kids to experience the pain. And the most important thing is to just be there with them and just say, I hear you. And I hear how you're feeling, and to let them talk and to really listen. And because it's difficult and at times, but as a parent, you can do it. You can do it. And you do have to know yourself. You have to then be able to take care of yourself before and after whatever you're experiencing with your child in order to be there with them.
And I think that so much of the reason why parents have a challenge with this, besides some false beliefs about what children need that are perpetuated by our culture, is that for decades now, we've been taught the idea that we need to think ourselves out of our feelings. And so parents then try to use reasoning skills with kids' feelings, which is, first of all, not effective at all at the younger ages, but also just leads to a situation where the child feels not listened to, but that you're in there trying to fix them. And the other thing is that many parents find that the very cognitive skills they use to manage their own feelings don't work at all when it's your kid. There is something raw about the experience of our children's feelings that is just different from other relationships. And so it really comes down to, in my opinion, understanding that those sorts of brain-based, thinking-based methods don't really work. You have to start to understand more of the body-based methods, or from the nerdy viewpoint, the autonomic nervous system, and how that kicks in for us unconsciously. So
Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. And I mean, that's where I came up with that really simple method in my TEDx talk, which was basically a way to be able to modify your own nervous system without even needing to understand any of the science behind it. So I taught parents that whenever you feel anxious or you feel a should, sigh, see, and start. So sigh, take a deep breath all the way into your belly and let it go long and slow. I love a long, slow out breath because that sends a message to our nervous system that we're really safe. You see, our nervous system, a lot of people know this now, is really designed for a time where we spent our days running away from predators. And you can't breathe out long and slow if you're being chased by a lion. So it's a very quick hack to tell your body, you know what, I'm safe right now. Then you see the child, you see the situation, you see what's going on, you see their body language. And you know what that is. That's a mindfulness step, right? Because mindfulness is full acceptance of the full awareness of the present with acceptance. And then you start trying something different, start listening, start considering what's appropriate, start something, start nothing, start the wrong thing. And that gets into the full technique, but once you start the wrong thing, you trigger another anxiety reaction. You say, oh, I should have done it differently. But that's okay, because you can just sigh, see, and start again. So this method moves people into connection with their own body, but it also helps them take a very different viewpoint to parenting. Instead of, I need to get it right the first time, you start more of an experimental-based interaction where you just try stuff and you learn from your own child. The autonomic nervous system is something that I think we're all thinking a lot about when we try to help people. And it triggers before you even know it's triggering. So something happens and you immediately feel anxious and your breathing gets shallow and faster. Your heart rate goes up. You start sweating. You stop. Your face gets flatter. Your voice gets flatter. Your eyes close, and your kid picks up on that. And that's the thing is that I just saw a really cool study today. They built an MRI machine for 2 people, and they watched how their brainwaves synced up while they were hanging out in there. And that's the thing is we actually sync with each other. So if the parent's all upset.
Right. Well, that's the mirror neurons, right? Not to get
exactly.
That's underneath that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. So if the parent's freaking out, the kid's going to freak out. But then some parents try to do the old school method, what our parents did, which is, well, just don't tell the kid you're upset. So you're feeling the stress, but you don't share it with the kid. And that's a mature viewpoint, except you can't do that. Recent research shows that kids pick up on it and are actually even more upset if their mother is stressed or anxious and then tells them she's not. Then the kids get really worried.
Well, not only that, what we teach our kids when we do that is not to trust their instincts, right? Because what they're observing is mommy or daddy or someone is feeling this way, and then they're saying, but no, I'm not. And then they learn to not trust themselves. And we see that later in adults then because they're not trusting of themselves. Your method also reminds me of something I taught a couple of weeks ago. I talked about this, and that is in terms of relationships, I did the method called, the acronym I used, SNAP, right? So stop, name the feeling, like stop, figure out what you're feeling, name it, right? Then accept it, and then make a plan for what you need to do. So SNAP. And I'll talk more about that in the future. So this has been really helpful. Before I give people because I'm looking at the time and I want to have time for people to ask questions. Alison, what would you say right now would be the top 3 things that you would want people to take away from our talk tonight? Like given, what's happening, where we are in the world right now, with all the challenges, both personally, as a community, what would be the top 3 things that you would want folks to be able to take away from tonight, if they could?
I mean, this is a massive cultural trauma for us. This is a worldwide shared experience, and there is no minimizing how bad this is. And while some people are having relatively mild experiences, and other people are experiencing tremendous suffering, we're all facing this invisible, dangerous threat, this life threat, and this uncertainty about the future. I studied history before I started studying medicine and psychology. And what I have to say from history is very simply this: we will survive and we will find a way through this. And I hope that we can do it with an emphasis on teamwork and genuine innovation and not with destructive conflict. But these things pass. They come with a certain regularity in human history, and they also pass. And after every cultural trauma like this, there's historical precedent for a time of renewal. So that can happen at the family level, and that can happen at the broader cultural level. There would have been no Renaissance without the Black Plague. And this is very important to understand. I know I didn't give you 3 bullet points here, Susan, but
no, I'm just noting, I'm hearing 2 at least. So yeah. What I'm hearing is this will pass, okay, and there will be a renewal, and we will survive and come out maybe even better than before. whatever that looks like. And it doesn't mean that we're not suffering with, and I hate to use the word suffering, but it doesn't mean that we're not going to experience the pain. But we should also keep in mind that we can look forward and that this will end. So I am hearing three things. You know, this will pass. There'll be
and then just to remember that, especially for the families who are experiencing direct trauma, with the right support, and that includes therapists like Dr. Susan, we see more than just people getting through things. We see something called post-traumatic growth, where people can actually come out of these things with greater joy, greater understanding of themselves. So that is not to minimize anything, but it is to bring the hope.
Right, absolutely, right. And that's a great point, because we will, and I agree with everything that you said, and this has been great. And I want to open it up now for questions. So I will, I think I will ask, you can either put, you know, maybe what you can do is if you have a question, put your name in the chat. If you can't unmute yourself, put your name in the chat, and then we can unmute you. Does anybody have a question?
So it looks like Belinda had a question. So let's see if we can unmute Belinda.
I think they are unable to mute themselves. So let's, okay. Belinda, you're unmuted. Could you talk?
Sure.
Okay, and I'm also going to put your video, hold on, I'm gonna unvideo you too, so you can, I think, okay, I'm asking you to start your video, so you have to do that. Great.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. So my question to you is, I said that Alison Armstrong had just did a free course online, and I was watching, and it's about women. But in it, I got this really interesting nugget of information. She was saying that teenage boys, specifically, they need to test and conquer. And that when they go home, and she was not talking about now because this was recorded like 10 years ago. When they go home, it's a safe place. They don't need to test and conquer. And she said if they do go home and they're stuck at home, which was interesting that she said that, they then need to test and conquer, and that's where video games come into play. So I'm thinking, wow, this is so interesting, because my son has limits still. He used to get an hour a day. Now we give him 2 hours a day, sometimes 3 if it's, you know, like a weekend or he has nothing to do. But it's still a battle. So my question to you is, do we give in a little bit more because he actually needs a little bit more? Or is it just still the addiction that we're dealing with? Because he's playing like Fortnite. That's his thing.
This is a really difficult question to answer because the research, if you look at the research on this, you will find 20 studies that all contradict each other. There's definitely evidence that for boys, it's funny because I have feelings about violence and all of that, but the reality is that a first-person shooter game has been shown to actually build some of their self-confidence, right? And I think that not increase violence for most kids. Correct.
It does, but for most, it actually doesn't. So yeah.
That's right, and I think that most kids can make that distinction. I personally, my kids are younger, so I prefer games where the violence is a little more cartoonish. So I won't let them, even though they want to play Call of Duty, I won't let them. But that being said, we know it's actually a positive self-esteem activity for them. It is play to them, and many of them can chat with their friends online. So it is actually a social activity. And we know that boys are not, they'll talk with their friends, but more often boys like to do something with their friends. So it's an opportunity while we're, you know, separated from each other to do that. I think that many families have relaxed their rules about screen time during this time. And honestly, if they didn't have online school, I might even let them take a little more than 2 hours, you know. I may get blasted on Facebook for that one, but my kids are getting about 2.5 hours of recreational gaming a day, you know. I think that this comes down to the same thing we end up with just about every problem with kids. Okay, so like that kid that comes home from school and naps, and the parent wants to know, is napping bad? And the question is it impairing them, right? Do they nap and then get up and do their homework and then go to bed and get a decent night's sleep? Then it's fine. Do they nap and then stay up till 2 a.m. and get a lousy night's sleep? Then it's a problem. So if you're noticing that your son feels some satisfaction with that, you know, and it's doesn't seem to be associated with a deteriorating mood, then you're probably fine. And if you're seeing the other problem, 2 things. It could be the video game, so you can try cutting him off and see what happens. But it might also be that he's starting to develop depression, and that he's looking for the video games because he's depressed. So that would be a time to check in, you know, with your doctor.
I just want to underscore what you said, because that is key. That is key, Allison, in terms of looking at the issue from an individual standpoint. Know your child, because it doesn't, and you might have several children, and it's a different formula, it's a different recommendation for each of the children, because each child is different. And you can also have a conversation with them and say, you know, I'm thinking, you know, in addition to everything Allison said, but depending on what your observation is, have a conversation and say, here's where I'm coming from. Here's what I'm experiencing with you. You're watching 2.5, 3 hours of participating in this video game. I'm worrying that it's causing A, B, and C. I did this with my daughter years ago. I thought she was watching like horrific shows, and I said to her, you know, and I'm not going to name the show, but I said, I don't think you should be watching this show, because I thought it was just teaching her really bad behavior and really bad values. And she's like, no, actually, I'm learning what I don't want to be. And I'm like, wow. But I would have never known that if I didn't have the conversation with her. So I think it's also important to have the conversation, and you can do that really no matter how young they are, you know, is to include them, to let them know what you're thinking about, what you're concerned about, and see what their response is, and have a negotiation about it.
I had a similar experience. I was really freaked out that my son's favorite Star Wars movie was the one where Anakin Skywalker kills everybody and turns into Darth Vader. And it really freaked me out. Like, is he attracted to villains and stuff? Turns out that's the movie with the most action and the best lightsaber battles. So when I finally asked him, he explained that to me. But I do have to express sympathy, Belinda, because you have a teenage boy. So have to be reasonable about how well he'll be able to explain himself when you ask him.
Right. Yes. Yeah. In his language, right?
Right.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Anybody, Belinda, do you have another question or any comments? Okay. Anyone else have any comments or questions? You can even, if you want to add to the conversation, that would be great too. I'm looking at this side. I'm not sure I see anybody else have any comments or feedback. Okay. I don't have a question, but I thought this was helpful, so thank you guys. Oh, that's great. Thank you, Jen. And if there was anything in particular, I could speak for both of us. When people say it's helpful, I know I'd like to know, is there anything in particular that you found helpful? Because sometimes what we think is helpful might not have been helpful. And you might have thought something was even more helpful than we did. So please feel free to just also let us know if there was anything in particular that you were able to take away from this talk. Okay, Jen. The part about the video games and talking more about the scientific stuff. Great, great.
Yeah, you know, it's always easy to get me talking about scientific stuff.
Great. Oh, Belinda's saying her son is happier in quarantine, it seems. You know, I don't know. For me also, I've said this to a couple of people that, yeah, I'm kind of happy just staying in. I'm talking to everybody more online. I think I've actually been in touch with more people and spending more social time with some people than I've ever done prior to the quarantine. So it's kind of been interesting.
I think when you take a culture that's focused on maximizing everything, and we filled our schedules so full, and then you just hit the pause button. And
Well,
I realize that's not true for everybody. The parents who are both working and with young kids are telling me it's not a pause at all. But it's allowed more relaxed, spontaneous time in my family. You know, my husband hasn't had a commute, and we're around each other more. And I've discovered things about my kids that I didn't know, you know, and I thought we were very attentive parents, but there's something about just having that relaxed, you know, less scheduled time together that's pretty great.
great. How's your husband doing?
Oh, you know, I think he's doing great. He is in marketing for Molson Coors, and alcohol's doing great right now. So I think, you know, I think his business is booming. Mm-hmm.
That's great and unfortunate at the same time, right? So Belinda's saying thank you. Great. I think that's a whole nother hour of, you know, the whole alcohol challenges. And Jen, who was just talking, actually, she's a specialist in working with families of people who have challenges with alcohol. So maybe I'll have a conversation with her as well, because I think, you know, it presents different issues depending on if you have an issue or not. You know, so
Exactly. Yeah, because
like anything else, right? Like, you know, it's like anything else. So
mm-hmm.
let's see, who's Maggie? Okay. So Maggie, do you want to? I can unmute people. Maggie, do you want to? Let's say, let me just. Do you want to say something, Maggie? I unmuted you.
That's the name of my phone. This is Earl.
Hi,
Oh,
Earl.
hi, Earl. It says Maggie. That's so funny.
It's named after a Simpsons character.
Oh, that's hysterical.
The autonomic nervous system discussion was great because I'm into the science of most things, so I like that.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that lately because of the experience of doctors during this, and nurses and everyone that supports us. For instance, when, you know, because it's something that doctors have never had to face before in the US. I'm not saying it's not the case elsewhere, but I was trained to never, ever reuse a mask, to always take those precautions. And the expectation was always that I was going to have the equipment, that I would be protected in every possible way, that we would never take chances on getting infection ourselves. And then
Right.
COVID came, and we don't have the supplies. And despite advocacy efforts, that has not been corrected. So we're still facing massive shortages of what we need to keep ourselves and our teams safe. And so doctors are experiencing something they've never experienced before, which is fear, just raw fear of taking care of patients that might give them a fatal disease. And we're watching our colleagues get sick or die, and some of them are recovering, of course. But what's interesting is what that does to your performance, because it turns on the fight or flight response. And as soon as that happens, you lose access to some of your higher critical thinking skills, and you lose your bedside manner. You lose your ability to be warm and comforting and present, because all your brain can do is focus on the threat.
Right.
And so I think that my office environment now is one where I've come through that, and I feel much more comfortable. But when I think about my ER colleagues and my colleagues in the urgent cares, I hope we can all have compassion on them if they don't seem as warm and loving and comforting as you might want your doctor to seem.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. That's a lot of pressure that people do not really understand. That's like a constant pressure, like constant. So
I feel even more for the staff, you know, the nurses and the, I don't know. I guess there's an additional burden when you're the leader on the team as the doctor, but I especially feel for the teams and the staff, because in another way, because they're not the leader, there's also a sense of maybe not having control. And I think that that's hard to feel like you're at risk and maybe not having as much control as you'd like, you know? So hopefully our industry, America's amazing, and we have all this manufacturing capacity. So I just hope somebody sends us the masks and the gowns and all the stuff we need, because I'm not sure why we don't have that yet.
Yeah, that's a whole nother discussion.
for sure.
And I do want to just underscore in terms of, you know, that's just again, another discussion about what the people on the first line are experiencing. And not only what they're experiencing now, and this is true, I think, for everyone. I know I can speak for myself. I've kept busy, so I really haven't had a pause. I think physically I have, because I'm in the same spot. But I know I work a lot and I keep very busy. But there's a part of it that for me, I'm thinking, oh, this is going to hit me even more so later. And I think for some of us, that's going to happen. And just to be aware of that for yourself, for your loved ones, for your kids, for everyone, because we're just in it, right? And we're doing everything we can to survive. And I don't know none of us knows what the future is going to look like, but when it gets a little bit better than in terms of being able to go out again, whatever that looks like, we're going to have continued reactions to it. And, you know, it's almost like somebody said to me today, like, it's not just post-traumatic stress, it's almost continued traumatic stress, because we're in an unknown for us right now. It's not, when 9/11 happened for us in New York, it was an event that happened and we dealt with the aftermath in different ways for different amounts of time. With what's happening to us now, it's different in that it's continuing. There's not an on and off of the actual event. The event itself is continuing, and so it'll be interesting to see how we react to that. And I think, you know, I just want to go back again to a point. Just know, if I could give it a takeaway from this for everyone, is to just know yourself and check in with yourself. And really just do that, because we don't do that enough, I think, in our society. And I know there's a lot of stuff on mindfulness now, but take it really seriously. And what all that means is just check in and say, you know, wait, how am I actually doing, right? You stop. What am I feeling, right? And, you know, use the SNAP method. Stop, go, what am I feeling? What am I experiencing? Name it. Really just name it. And when you name something, it lessens the power of it. Accept it. Don't judge yourself. That's related to Alison's don't should yourself, right? Don't should all over yourself. Just accept it. Don't beat yourself up for the way you feel. And then go, all right, you know, what's my plan? What do I need right now? And in every moment, it's going to be different. But I think if we do that a little bit more, then we can take care of ourselves and the people that we love, and especially our kids.
I've got to give 2 points on that. Number one, Susan, you're really describing, you know, you said, oh, it's not post-traumatic trauma, it's more ongoing. Well, you're describing complex trauma, right? That's what that is. And the thing to know about that is we know about that too. And we know that you can get through that too, that you can recover from that too. But the integration that we have to do, the processing and the understanding ourselves and our world in a new way so that we can move on is hard to do until you're out of the situation. And that might be another 18 months. So we've got to hunker down and find what works for us. And so the next thing I had to share, because I'm very excited about this, couple exciting studies. One is that they found that you can actually fill your sense of social support through things that don't involve people. So it turns out that things like those guilty pleasures, like binge watching that show you like, or reading a book, or even eating comfort food, careful with that one, but still, there's this dark chocolate I've been really enjoying every day, actually can make us feel socially full. And so those are important tools to use. And then the other is that virtual eye contact works just as well as in person for regulating our autonomic nervous system. The key is it doesn't work on Zoom, because when you're on Zoom or Skype, you're always looking away from everybody, right? Like Susan, if I look at you right now, I'm not looking at my camera. So you feel like I'm not looking at you. To make you feel like I'm seeing you, I have to look at my camera, which means I'm basically just staring at this dot on my monitor. But if you do like a FaceTime call or a bi-directional video call where you really feel like you guys are looking at each other's eyes and you can give each other the feeling of being seen, then it's actually as good for the autonomic nervous system and for feeling like you're socially connected as being in person. And I think that's really exciting given social distancing.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because that is so important for people to hear. And I look forward to seeing everybody next week. Please stay safe. And thank you again. And thank you, Debbie and the Mentor Project, so much for allowing us to be here tonight. And please, everybody, the Mentor Project is amazing. mentorproject.org. We have a lot of parents on here. If you want your kids to be able to view some real quality talks and activities, it's mentorproject.org. Okay, thank you all. Thanks again, Alison. I hope that this series finds you healthy, well, and if you have any questions or comments or need any further information, please contact me. You can reach me at yourvoice@drsusan.nyc. yourvoice@drsusan.nyc or drsusan@drsusancares.com. drsusan@drsusancares.com. Please be safe. Please take care of you and your loved ones. And I look forward to seeing you at the next episode of Your Voice with Dr. Susan, the home edition. Thank you.